I've seen young ones carrying rocks as though they're babies. Makes you think, well, where do dolls come from? Where do those kinds of behaviour come from?
We saw a chimpanzee wearing around her neck a strip of colobus skin, and she eventually took it off and discarded it by the side of the path. And when we picked it up, we realized it was actually a knotted necklace.
This boy who fell into an enclosure at the zoo and was rescued by a gorilla female. This female actually paid attention to an unconscious boy and brought him to a place where people could take care of it.
Once upon a time, not that long ago, human beings stood apart from the rest of creation. We lived on an island, basking in the splendors of civilization. Mozart, Shakespeare, God. We viewed the other animals across an unbridgeable gulf. The apes had fur, teeth, and instincts. Only we had souls. Then we started to look more closely at our nearest relatives, and the gulf began to shrink. One by one, the differences vanished. Consciousness, intelligence, emotions. Now, finally, it looks as if the apes may even share with us the ultimate hallmark of humanity: culture. Is there nothing that distinguishes us from the beasts? And will this realization change the way we see ourselves? We've always half loved and half feared our closest cousins. Ever since Darwin, we've known we came from here or somewhere nearby, but we view the apes' antics with horror. Violence, murder, bestial sex, rape. There, but for the grace of God, go we. And we breathe a sigh of relief. We're different. We humans have escaped our dark side. But what if we're not so different after all? Frans de Waal is one of the world's leading primatologists. A lifetime of observing apes has led him to a momentous conclusion.
Well, I'm an observer, first of all. I've been watching primates in general for 25 or more years. And chimpanzees, I must have watched them maybe for 10,000 hours. And now they have reached a point where we can very forcefully say chimpanzees are completely dependent, actually, on culture for survival.
Frans de Waal thinks apes have culture, learned traditions that are passed on from one generation to the next. It's a conclusion many will find disturbing, for if chimps have culture, maybe there's nothing special about us after all.
The standard notion of humanity as the only form of life who has made the step from nature to culture, as if we opened the door to a new life, is really in urgent need of correction. We associate the term culture always with high culture, like going to listen to Beethoven and Mozart, or going to the museum, which is also part of human culture, obviously, but eating French fries in the street, as Dutch people do, for example, is also part of culture. And so having sneakers or baseball caps on, and it's all part of culture. So culture is actually a very broad phenomenon. And what we are saying, always saying, is that some primates or some other animals have some aspects of human culture, and enough of it to speak of culture in their case.
Frans de Waal is not alone. A recent survey of chimp behavior right across Africa has reached the same dramatic conclusion.
When we first published these results comparing the different cultures across Africa, it actually managed to hit the front page of the New York Times, and there was even an editorial in the New York Times which was expressing anxiety that, yes, This is the last bastion, as it were, of our uniqueness.
What is more pleasant than tea in the garden on a nice summer's day? The London Zoo...
We've come a long way from the innocent pleasure of the chimpanzee's tea party. But even back then, there were clues that apes aren't quite as simple as they may appear.
The waiters are very decent.
The Apes Tea Party was an invention of several European zoos. I don't think it was just in London, but it was very appropriate for the British audience because tea is so important in your culture. And so they taught the chimps to drink tea in a very civilized fashion. And the chimps actually at some point got very good at it. So good at it that it started to threaten the human ego.
So, to restore our bruised egos, the keepers encouraged the chimps to ham it up with silly capers. We loved to see them get it wrong. It made us feel superior once more. But the cosy sideshow betrayed a deep denial. Darwin told us these were our first cousins, but the whole fabric of our culture insisted we were different, special.
Religion and philosophy places us apart and gives only humans a soul, which also allows us to exploit nature to any degree we want. And so that has always been sort of the Christian attitude towards nature and towards animals in general. And I think what has happened is that the term culture got the same color as the term soul. And they would say, we have made a transition. We have moved from nature to culture. We have transcended human nature. Human biology is basically not important. We are cultural creatures. And that's why it's so important to attack the whole concept of we are the only ones with culture.
And it wasn't just religion that declared us unique. Biology at the time was under the spell of scientists with an enormous blind spot when it came to the abilities of animals.
Behaviorists of the old school considered all animals interchangeable because the laws of learning would apply to all of them, and whether you studied a frog or a cat didn't really matter.
Just 50 years ago, our only understanding of animal behavior came from experimental studies of stimulus and response. The so-called behaviorist school looked on animals as furry black boxes with little more than instincts. Hunger leads to eating. The need to reproduce leads to procreation. Animals were seen as machines, wired with a basic set of needs and urges. Nobody'd thought of looking at how animals actually behave in the wild, in their natural state. If they're all the same, why bother? But then, in 1960, a young woman from England, encouraged by paleontologist Louis Leakey, travelled to a forest reserve called Gombe, on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, to start the first ever study of wild chimpanzees. Jane Goodall started a revolution.
Right from the beginning here was this kind of Beauty and the Beast story. A young girl goes into forest, all the early interviews about me, Tarzan, you gentlemen, it was quite ridiculous.
That she was a woman with no formal science training was no accident.
Louis Leakey specifically chose women. He felt they made better observers and were more patient. And really, my sense of mission was, let's find out anything we can. So there was no hypothesis to prove. I knew that Louis was hoping that the findings would help him to have a better understanding of the way that early humans may have behaved, since these were our closest living relatives in the natural habitat.
Right from the start, Jane Goodall saw striking similarities.
I don't think there was a light bulb. It was just that the whole of their behavior was unfolding, and it was becoming clearer and clearer how complex they were. The chimpanzee shows all the same kinds of characteristics that we show.
A few years later, a Japanese researcher called Tetsuro Matsuzawa started studying chimps further to the west, at a place called Bossou in Guinea. He too came from a very different cultural background, and he too was struck by his first impressions.
I thought it should be a big black monkey, but it was not.